What do you make of the fact that the longest serving Home Secretary has become, within 1 week, the Prime Minister of the country? Professor Garnett.
Well, there's certainly been a couple of weeks of dramatic change in British politics. I must say that when I was asked this question before the referendum, Mrs May was the person who I actually thought would become the next Prime Minister, and that's because she had played such a skillful hand during this time of great division over Brexit. So from that point of view, it's not very surprising. Also, of course, Mrs Thatcher is a great role model for female politicians. Very difficult for anyone to feel that they're taking the second go, as it were, as a woman as Prime Minister. But even so, that does mean that whereas the Labour Party has never had a woman leader, the Conservative Party has now had 2 women leaders, and we've had 2 women Prime Ministers. So there's a surprise about it, but it's not entirely unpredictable.
Mr. Ross, Ms May was being chosen as the Prime Minister. It's not necessarily because she is female, but rather because it is a very divided country, divided party. You urgently need a leader. And what about now? Will she be able to struggle juggling with all the priorities?
Well, she will have to do whatever Angela Merkel tells her to do.
Well, really?
Yes, all the terms that Britain can negotiate for Brexit will be determined by Angela Merkel. I mean, the reality is, by the referendum, no British party dares leave the single market of the European Union. And Angela Merkel will decide whether she's prepared to make any concessions to allow Britain to stay in the European Union. So, therefore, Theresa May will have to wait for her instructions to find out whatever Angela Merkel is prepared to grant to her.
Well, that probably is quite an extreme answer, some would say, but Ms May
it's a realistic answer.
Oh, all right. Prime Minister May, I should say, has been compared before as Britain's Angela Merkel, but of course, whether that comparison is relevant or not today is another question. What do you make of it, Mr. Janning, of the sudden rise of Ms May? Will she be able to juggle with all of these priorities?
Well, first of all, I think the idea of Merkel giving instructions to other leaders is pretty much nonsense. This is a negotiation process, and Merkel will have a role in there, and she will pursue pretty much the same policies as other heads of government in the EU. In fact, she will be rather interested in getting a fair deal agreed with Britain, because Britain is a significant economic partner, not a very large economic partner, but still substantial. So she will not want to see this end in a mess. Now, her priorities, I think, are pretty clear. She has to get this Brexit process underway, and she has to put it on the right track. And that will require that she makes sure that the next steps are taken on a rather realist assessment of where Britain actually is. So her designated, or her new, in fact, secretary for exiting the European Union, I think, has some rather unrealistic ideas about how easily Britain could negotiate free trade agreements before actually leaving with other countries. I don't think it's going to be that way.
All right. We will leave whether the 2 ladies will have chemistry toward one another, Angela Merkel and Theresa May, for future discussion. So today, let's focus on the new cabinet coming into the office and a new Prime Minister. Professor Garnett, let me ask you about this. There are several priorities. You got divided party, the Conservative Party. You also got a divided country with populism on the rise, distrust of the politicians. Meanwhile, Brexit, which is on the agenda. Prime Minister May, she talked about Brexit means Brexit. That means out in her speech when she was doing the inaugural speech. So what would that mean? Understanding the fact that, Professor, that Prime Minister May, when she was the Home Secretary, she has been Eurosceptic. However, she was with the Remain campaign.
Yes, indeed. She clearly had some disagreements with the European Union, but overall came down in favour of membership. And that's a very pragmatic view of the subject when so many people have very emotional views. That was one of the reasons that I thought that she would make a suitable leader. She did say that Brexit means Brexit, but of course Brexit is a very complicated process. I think what she was trying to say was that she was going to enter negotiations with a determination to present the case which the British people had asked her to present. In other words, this very narrow verdict in the referendum in favour of leaving had to be taken seriously. But I think she is the kind of person, nevertheless, who is going to take developments and events into account.
Yeah.
And that if it seems to be very much against British interests for us to leave the European Union, she is the kind of person who may well be able to explain that it's time to rethink this position.
Professor Garnett, of course, at this moment, we do not know exactly her blueprint. There's no exact blueprint yet. We do not know exactly the inner thought that is going on within this prime minister, the new one that just came into the office. But we do know some signs. For example, her choices of some of the important posts regarding issues related to Brexit. The Brexit Secretary, David Davis, and also the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, as well as the Trade Secretary. So from all of these positions, what direction do you think it might take the cabinet itself, including the Prime Minister, in terms of their approach to Brexit? Or even not Brexit, as you hinted earlier?
Well, I hinted, I think an awful lot has got to happen while that process is going on. But in the meantime, what Theresa May has done with these appointments is to give the most important roles to people who were firmly in favour of Brexit. Certainly David Davis has been in that position for a very long time. Liam Fox is well known for that position. Boris Johnson is the really surprising appointment. I myself didn't think she would offer him a job like that. It's a tremendous risk, and it means that Boris Johnson is going to have to transform himself from an entertainer into a politician. And whether he can cope with that or not, I don't know. But Mrs. May has obviously calculated that although this is still a very important role, in many ways Britain's Foreign Secretary in foreign policy terms is now less important than the Prime Minister in foreign policy terms, and that in many respects I'm not saying necessarily Britain takes its orders from other countries automatically, but Washington and other countries really are a very important determinant. So the main point here is that she's giving the jobs to people who believe in Brexit and letting them get on with those jobs.
All right. Talking about Brexit, Mr. Ross, we understand there are different approaches already being outlined by think tanks, for example, inside our country in the UK. The so-called soft approach, soft Brexit, as they say, and the hard Brexit. The hard Brexit, let's just explain just a little bit to our audience, means it's totally cut off from the EU, having its, even from the single market, and also set up the tax system, a tariff system between the EU and UK. That means hard. But the soft one means remain in the single market, having certain kinds of Norwegian type of agreement with the EU. Do you see any sign that is suggesting any direction between the two?
It depends entirely what the European Union wants. The most significant...
Really? The UK does not have a say? Have a say.
It has no say at all. Once it's decided to leave, the European Union will decide what agreement it wishes to come to with the European Union. The formal position of Britain is nil, absolutely nil. It has no say in the matter whatever, right? The people can decide that they wish for certain reasons to make concessions, etc., but Britain has no power to impose anything. Also, another matter I consider the most significant development that took place today was that two of the contenders for the leadership of the Labour Party, which is Owen Smith and Angela Eagle, came out with a position that there must be a second referendum on the actual terms of Brexit.
Well, there has been different talks all the time.
Yes, and I also know that people in the city, this is the position of many people in the City of London, And the terms that will be negotiated for Brexit will probably be very negative. Again, it depends what, I don't want to put it personally, let's not put it as Angela Merkel, but we know really Germany will decide the negotiating.
Okay, and let's have the Germans talk. Mr. Janning.
Yeah, no, just for a moment. Right. They will, so therefore, but Britain has no negotiating rights in the matter. Once it applies to
Okay, we heard you. Okay, Mr. Ross, we heard you. What about you, Mr. Janning? Does Britain have its maneuvering space? How much does it have? And meanwhile, how much would a prime minister, the position of Mrs. May, be able to help with that maneuvering position?
Well, actually, Britain has a lot of room to maneuver, but Britain has to make up its own mind. Mm-hmm. You know, when the UK wants to leave the European Union and doesn't ask for anything, it won't have anything. If it wants to leave the single market, it will have left the single market. So the point is what actually Britain wants to get from the European Union. If Britain wants single market access, the EU will, and there I agree with my colleague, the EU will say what are the terms for having access to the single market, and Britain will have to agree with these terms because there will be little negotiating room. But if Britain says we can do without the single market, we just want a free trade agreement, okay, the EU will negotiate a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom, because a lot of European industry also has interest to export to the UK. And again, the UK negotiating position will not be very strong because it's a pretty small player compared to a big, pretty large one. But that will be the same experience that the UK will gain with free trade talks with the United States or China. You know, it's a tiny place in a large global economy.
Even a conversation involving 4 people, we've already got so many diversified opinions, not to mention when the Brexit plan is being debated inside the UK, how much that will be when it comes to an uproar in the society. Therefore, let me go to you, Professor Garnett. What do you make of it? I mean, at the end of the day, Mrs. May, the Prime Minister, she has to not only work on the Brexit, but also work on the economy as well, and work on all the rising sentiment in the public once whatever the plan of Brexit is being announced, and also Scotland looking at its own referendum to leave the UK. So all of these, how much quality does she have which make sure she will be able to maneuver all of these all at the same time?
Well, I think Mrs. May faces more considerable challenges than any Prime Minister who's taken office since 1940, since the time of the Second World War. We've had difficult times in the 1970s, but as you rightly say, there are so many big issues facing this Prime Minister, and in particular the future of the United Kingdom, which is very much wrapped up with the future of Britain within the European Union. These are issues which are quite constitutionally incredibly important, but there are other issues which are more traditional, one would say, concerning the economy, the sense that the gap between the rich and the poor in Britain has grown more than ever, and as she's referred to this in her speeches in recent days, but this is on its own a colossal challenge. Mr. Blair came to office in 1997 saying that he was going to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, and he failed, and so very difficult to see. So Mrs. May herself is a very tough and pragmatic politician, very good at decision making, but she's also going to have to delegate. She's going to have to choose responsible and capable people, because no single person can cope with one of these dilemmas on their own, let alone all of them at once.
Well, we understand, Ms. Janning. Let me just inform you, I'm sure you probably is much better informed than I am about Mrs. May, that she is one who loves cooking. She even have more than 100 cookbooks, I was told. But would she be able to put all of these ingredients and crises together and come up with something that is edible? That is a big question, particularly with another election not too far away, because we're talking about the election system and the cycle once again. So what do you make of it, Mr. Janning, the prospect for this lady at a crisis?
Well, you know, she has all these cookbooks, but probably, as Professor Garnett was saying, there is no recipe for the meal that she's about to prepare. So there has to be some trial and error. And there her pragmatism has to, or will be tested, because will have to continuously adjust her policy to the realities that she is going to find. And some of them are only unfolding, and some of them will enforce her to correct and interpret the beliefs and perceptions that a lot of her countrywomen and countrymen have about their place in the world. And that, I think, will be decisive on her success, whether she will be able to make these adjustments and take along the people into a more realist approach to the outside world.
At crisis, for leaders to function, sometimes they could fail, but sometimes they could take this opportunity as the force for unity and therefore move forward. Mr. Ross, what do you think? Mrs. May, will that be able to catch that opportunity no matter what happened within the country and even from outside?
No, because what a leader can do is determined by the circumstances they're in. And she's in impossible circumstances. It's not acceptable for Britain just to have a free trade area because it's the position of the City of London. Unless the City of London can have access to the single market, the British economy is in a great mess. And that's determined whether it has access to the single market, as my German friend said, by whether the European Union agrees to it.